There's some of these back at the book table, and we've got some if you want to grab one for yourself. We want you to take some if you want a pack for a team or something like that. We've got some of those that are for sale as well, but we've got at least one for free for everybody. So we're going to talk through these briefly before we kind of come to a conclusion for today. When you visit a healthcare facility, these are just quick tips. So this is not so much death and grief as much as hospital visits, okay? Because I know that's a big part of Special Stevens Ministries. That's a big part of what you do. Call ahead, ask for the patient's room number. I also would add, ask for what door you should go in and where that door is, where you should park. It's like navigating an airport sometimes when you go to a larger hospital. And by doing this, you're going to lessen your anxiety as you're going in trying to find something so that you're more spiritually ready to talk with that person when you see them. And then go to the facility, and I put that in there because I have known pastors who are supposed to go and they just don't. So actually go, actually show up. Showing up physically, really important, really valuable, like we talked about with Job's friends. Sanitize your hands on the way into the room. Why? Because you will probably want to sanitize your hands on the way out of the room after you've been in there with somebody that's sick and in a hospital setting and blood and IVs and all that. You communicate to them that you respect them when you sanitize your hands coming into the room. They're at more risk, obviously, for germs than you are most of the time. So sanitizing your hands shows honor and dignity to them as you're going in. Sit down. We talked through that at length earlier. Just listen. Shut up. I had to shut up in there for us. Keep it private. Prayer lines, right? Man, I want to put something out on the prayer line, but how do I do it in a way that honors their privacy? I think this is an important question these days. To allow every patient to have the same amount of control over their story as you would want to have over your own. I think about pregnancy announcements. A woman wants to make the announcement of her pregnancy to whom and with whom, when she wants to do it, right? She wants to control how that goes out. It's similar with somebody's health diagnosis. They want to share it with whom, and they may say, "I don't care." Tell anybody. If that's the case, then you've got that permission. But generally, we're going to keep it private. And then generally, I would say keep your visit short. This is exhausting. It's exhausting being in the hospital, and to have a long conversation can sometimes be very difficult. So most of the time, I would say keep it short. Sometimes I encourage you to stay until it's over. And that can mean a variety of things, right? Stay until the surgery is over, stay until the diagnosis comes out, stay until the doctor comes to give, whatever news or update. Sometimes it means stay until the person has died. And so when we thought back to those times, either for our personal life or we were supporting someone, we stayed until they reached the end of their life. You remember that the rest of your life. You remember people who supported you. You remember it yourself being in there. Sometimes you need to be their advocate. So we talked about trusting the doctors, but sometimes you do need to speak up, right? And say, whoa, 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 no, 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 this is not the way this is going to go. This person has this right. This person needs to be honored in this way. So sometimes it's good to step out in the hall or to step aside with the doctor to say, I don't think you're understanding what this person's asking for. Or you just came in and blasted all this information. They didn't really receive any of it, and you need to go back in and have another conversation. I've seen pastors do that. I've seen chaplains do that, and I think it can be really important for our patients. Sometimes ask those deep questions. I contrast this with the diagnosis questions. We always want to know, like, how long have you been in? What are your blood pressures? What's the doctor saying? And we ask those sort of rapid fire questions. But sometimes questions like, what are you afraid of right now? What's the worst part of being in the hospital? These deeper questions allow them to open up to you in a way that they're not talking about maybe with the doctors and nurses because it's all medical and clinical. And then sometimes we can refer to another professional, right? Like we're talking with somebody that's in the hospital and we see clearly they need some therapy once they're out, or they need resources for transportation once they're out. So sometimes referring to another professional during a hospital visit can be really valuable. Then when I would say never force prayer. We've kind of gone here a little bit already today, but forcing prayer is kind of like forcing little kids to apologize to each other. They don't mean it. And forcing somebody to pray who doesn't really want to talk to God right now because they're upset about their diagnosis, you're not actually going to get the reconciliation you think you're getting by forcing that prayer. And so sometimes I think people do want prayer, of course, and they might say, will you please pray with me or keep me on your prayer list, that sort of thing. But if they don't invite you, don't sort of shove that on them. And don't be afraid to cry. We've talked about that. Don't interrogate. Back to the diagnosis. You don't need to know everything about their diagnosis. They probably don't know everything about their diagnosis, so don't ask them everything. You know, if you're interrogating too much, they might not want to answer some of the deep questions because you've just been peppering them with all these questions about what's going on. Never question their faith. If you've been sick and you've been in grief, you know, you're trying to exercise your faith during that time in a way that you didn't ever really need to exercise it previously. And so for somebody in phase two to look at somebody in phase three and be like, you just need to have faith, probably the recommendation should go the opposite direction, right? Because the person who's in that hard time is already having to live in a place where they have more faith than they've ever had before. Don't disparage the clinicians. You know, talking bad about the doctor. Well, what do the doctors know? You know, you're going to be fine is not helpful to the patient. Even if you feel that way, even if you feel the doctor's a real hack or whatever, you know, saying that to the patient puts a gap between them and their care team, right? We all want to be on the same team as supporting that patient. We want the church, the doctor, and God to all be on the same team, hoping for the best for this patient. Never pretend you understand. Had a pastor tell me that after her husband died, there was someone who had treated her pretty poorly right after her husband died. And later, like years later, she got a call from this person and said that they apologized for treating her poorly during that time. Now she understands what she was going through because her dog had just died. And she went on at length to this woman about how now she understands what she was going through when Jim died because of her dog having died. Pretending she understood, right? Unhelpful. I think this pastor wanted to strangle this woman for talking to her that way. And last but not least, and this kind of goes back to praying the prayer committal, right? Never pretend you know what God will do next. We don't know. You know, there's been times we've been sure this person's about to die and they live on. Other times they're probably going to be fine and then they die. So we're not going to pretend that we know what God will do. The other handout that you've got or one of the other handouts that you've got in your folder is a congregational action plan. These are some ideas. So it has some of the red lettering on it. Some ideas of things that if you're looking for new systems, agreements, like we talked about with Job's friends, agreements to start in your congregation, some ideas of steps that you can take there. I'm not going to go through that, but I wanted to point it out to you as a resource. We've got a different review, so I'm not going to have you scan this review, but I am going to send you a PDF about the 5 worst things to say to somebody in grief. So when we get everything out, you'll receive that as well. So just a little bit about a word at what's at the table, and then I'll conclude with what I think is one of the most interesting things to think about with grief. So these books are all available back there. They're a little discounted price, and obviously you don't have to wait for Amazon. Although these days, Amazon delivers it in like 20 minutes. Yeah, it's like I ordered something a while back. Actually, it was a book, not one of our books, but a different book. And it was like, it will be delivered overnight at 4 a.m. I was like, that's really not necessary. I will not be getting up to get the package off the porch at 4 a.m. and to start reading the book. But a little bit of a discount, and then they're obviously here in person as well. So these are the nonfiction ones, and this is the basic one. A lot of what we talked about today is going to parallel with what's in the first book. And then the fiction stuff was my way that I stayed sane during COVID was I wrote grief-related fiction, and I think it actually turned out pretty lovely. So those are available back there as well. And then these, I said, one free for every person. So stop by and get one if you haven't already. And then there's some little packs back there if you have a team that needs some of those that we have for sale as well. Okay, so this I think is fascinating. This is my camera phone picture of a book, so I apologize. It's a little bit grainy. This is Daniel Pink's book called When. They did a study. Do you know this? You're smiling already. Okay. So they did this study on a college campus, Michigan State University campus, where they set up a table in a public space, and they had 5 chocolates to give to students as they came by. For some of the students, for each of the students, for the first 4, every time they were given a chocolate, they were told, here's your next chocolate. And then they asked them to rate how much they liked that chocolate. With half of them, When they got to the fifth one, they said, "This is your last chocolate." And for the other half, they just one last time said, "This is your next chocolate." The group who was told that this was their last chocolate, their enjoyment level was significantly higher. Same chocolate, similar group of people, but because they were looking at it through the lens of this is my last one, they enjoyed it much more significantly. So what Daniel Pink says about this is that endings encode. The way that something ends, particularly a life, encodes how we think about it for the rest of our lives. The encoding power of endings shapes many of our opinions and subsequent decisions. He says poignancy seems to be particular to the experience of endings. The best endings don't just leave us happy. Instead, they produce something richer, a rush of unexpected insight, a fleeting moment of transcendence, the possibility that by discarding what we wanted, we've gotten what we need. What this means for your work is that if you are able to help people at the end of life and as they look back on life through grief, you will change how they think about their entire lives, change how they think about their loved ones' entire lives. You've watched movies before that were pretty good movies, and then the ending was horrible, and you hate that movie, right? Because the ending was horrible. And you watch other movies that, maybe were okay, and then the ending was just this fantastic twist, and you remember it forever. We can't change everything that happened before in that person's life, but by giving them good support as they reach the end of life, it's the way that as we move on linearly through time, when we look back at that, we look through the lens of that end, and that ending encodes how we think about those people. So the work you're doing is important because of lots of reasons, but particularly because of that, because it will shape how they think about that person, how they think about their own lives, help them to find meaning instead of just grasp, 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 and then it's over, which is a model that we don't want to see play out in the lives of our congregants, in our families' lives. So doing some advanced care planning, doing these good conversations, alters how they're going to see things as they look back over time. That's all I've got. I think I've gone a little bit longer than Carol wanted me to.